All right, good morning. Welcome to class. Thank you for being on time. It's always horrible to be late for Christ. Don't do that. All right, stop hugging back there. I don't know what that is. Hopefully everyone had a good week. If you're visiting today, welcome. Hang out a little bit. See if one of the elders can find you. And thank you for being here. So we're going to continue our ongoing series on looking at us through three lenses: tradition, scripture, and preference. Comes with some caveats up front, just so we can keep everything civil. No one feels the need to get kinetic. It's more about learning how we can approach others about Christ, knowing where they're at, knowing where we're at. So the topic is, where do our holidays come from? 2 weeks ago, we worked on the Old Testament. Last week, we worked on the New Testament. This week, we're going to begin to look at our traditions. There's a lot of ground to cover. If it goes over 1 week, that's fine. We'll continue to discuss it, and then ultimately we'll look at our individual preferences for that. So one caveat before we get into our traditions, based on a conversation Rod and I had after last week's lesson. So I think I'm using the term secular a little too freely. Why will become apparent when we talk about my preferences, when we bring up my house training or lack thereof in regards to Christ. But Christmas and Easter truly, purely are originally about Christ. Is that okay? It makes a difference in how we discuss it, and it made a difference in how I created these slides. So thank you, Rod. That's what it looks like when we work on each other. So please continue to do so on my behalf. So tradition, it's about history and culture. I walked around a little bit before class trying to find some targets. I've designated a few. You know who you are. Because tradition, when we talk about culture, is different for each of us, depending upon where we were raised and how we were raised. And it can create some internal conflict when we try to unlearn that house training. We'll get into more of that when we talk about preferences. So, is that a true statement? As a body in Christ, we have no issue with our secular holidays. Everybody's good to go about all of those. To a greater or lesser degree, I get it. Some of us aren't fans of New Year's Day because of what it is. But it's not a religious issue. It's a people can't act right issue. Right? Hans, which one?
I think I would say that as you get older, you strive to understand where the holiday came from, whereas in many cases people do not know. I'm just looking at those, but
Yeah.
in many cases people don't understand the date. Some of them involve.
I agree. There is a great deal of both historical and religious history ignorance in us as a people. I really should say you. I think I got it covered. But I have a lot of bias toward myself. All right, so nobody has an issue with any of those. Thanksgiving. We had a discussion about Thanksgiving beforehand. I've had people tell me that they thought Thanksgiving was a religious holiday. Surely the Pilgrims were religious. But this was about being thankful for not starving. It's an entirely different Donner Party kind of thing. Some of you know your history. I don't think it is, and that's why I put it on that list. If you think it is, then say so now. Otherwise, we're going to move away from it. Because there are three that are not on this list. And we're in the holiday season, so one of them is staring us in the face and two are right around the corner. All right, so we're all good with those. We'll see what happens when you bring them back up later.
Right. There is one that we just had that's not on this list.
Where?
Columbus Day.
So, Columbus Day. Yes, there are some that aren't on here. You could pick out all the others. So is Columbus Day a religious holiday? For Columbus Day, I like to go into my local supermarket and look for spices. Because that's what Columbus did, essentially. He just floated around the world looking for spices. But when I find them, my holiday's complete. But holidays change over time, but I'm not sure we want to crack that egg. We used to have Washington's birthday, and we used to have Lincoln's birthday. Then we celebrated one or the other, not both. Then we had President's Day. Armistice Day became Veterans Day. So holidays change. Don't get wrapped around the axle when holidays change in your lifetime. That's a natural part of history. And spinning your wheels against that isn't going to gain any traction. So, we have no issues about Easter and Christmas, right? We're all in total agreement of what they are and what they represent. Peace and harmony among us. To us. We're going to find out, because this is what our discussion is going to be about today. So I'm just setting the stage here for the conversation. And then, of course, there's always the one holiday that everybody wants to have issue with, right? This guy? I get it. So we're going to talk about those 3 holidays. Because I think the other ones there that happen on your right, my left, they just happen. We let them go. I'm glad if I get a day off. I'm not too upset if I don't. Sometimes I don't even know they happen. I mean, this Columbus Day was a day off for me, but not Troy. Troy didn't even know it was Columbus Day until I celebrated my holiday. And he's like, dude, what are you doing? So, we'll take a look at these. Halloween first. So, when does a holiday based on pagan rituals not become a pagan holiday anymore? Be careful with your answer. It will come back later. Ma'am. When it becomes about money. So when it becomes a consumerist holiday only. Okay? Is it pagan? So Gene raises a great point. That, in fact, might still fit under the pagan terminologies, right? It's not just something that happens, the barbarians and druids do in the woods. Potentially. Brian.
Can I see when it gets redefined by the dominant culture?
Okay, so now we have a textbook academic answer. Thank you. We needed it. When the culture that is celebrating it no longer determines it to be, and it becomes a part of their culture. Is that an accurate representation? Any others? So first we're going to do a little bit about the history of Halloween. Then we're going to do a little bit about our history with Halloween. They are not the same. Okay? As bodies of Christians go, we're new on the scene. Okay. So, originally, it was a Druidic holiday. They celebrated the changing of the seasons. And it was actually a celebration holiday in the early church. They celebrated the same season change as every other culture has, because things happen, new life is made. And then, in fact, they make it All Hallows Eve, which is a birthday of the saints celebration. Originally, they celebrated every Catholic saint you could find, and it was their day to celebrate all of them, because if you try to give each of them their own holiday, nobody works. Ever. So it starts out as a pretty fun day off for some of you peasants.
So you're saying this started as a celebration of all the Catholic saints?
Mm-hmm. That's how they took it over from the Druid holiday. Hold on, I got 2 people talking. Let me go.
So what you're saying is it originally started out as a Druid holiday to celebrate the autumn, the festivals, the harvest. Then it turned into a Catholic holiday to celebrate all of it.
Yeah. Gene.
Well, so to me,
Yes. So a funny thing happens on the way to your Catholicization? So I'll tell you, we'll get to you. I'll give you a story first. So when I was young and we were studying Italian history, for whatever reason, in elementary school, we had to write papers about the history of Italy. And my younger brother chose to write it on the change of the people. And he called it Italianization, the process by which one becomes Italian. And he took all the city-states of Italy and he put them together over time and marched them through until they were one people. That's what's going on here. Every time the religious culture of the time meets a different culture, there's a clash. Someone gets absorbed. There is no middle ground. You cannot be left to stand if you are not with us. You are against us. And so one of the great ways that all societies absorb others is by just taking your holiday, allowing you to think it's what it is, calling it something else over time. And since you belong to me now, over time it becomes what I call it and what I want it to be. You just have to wait and let it take the time. So yes, that's what they do. It's the easiest way to do it if you have time. If you don't, you do it by force. And we'll see some of that too. Sir.
Exactly what I was going to bring up.
All that. My brother. You know my brother. And the story of Italianization.
About picking the culture as it spread through the world, and take the current culture that was within, and they would incorporate it into their belief system in order to make it more palatable to their neighbors or whoever they were trying to make it by.
And the Romans are the best ever at it. And the Catholic Church practices a lot of those processes. We're the worst, by the way. We prefer to crush a culture than to absorb it. It's just who we are in our time. So everybody, after the Dark Ages, after all of the Middle Ages, and we get into the High Middle Ages, and we almost start to think we're civilized, and the Catholic Church has been around for almost 2,000 years, it is intolerant. And all of these holidays that have still managed to maintain even a semblance of their pagan roots, which they must, since it's a harvest festival, become evil. And they turn on the holiday. And they start practicing against it. We go so far in some cultures as to take away color. And we punish people for using it and wearing it. Puritans despise this thing. Here in America, it turns into witch trials, which really weren't as big as we like to tell ourselves, but someone still got hurt. And it becomes all of those things. And that's where most of our American understanding of the history of Halloween comes from, is all that recent history, because we were at least educated enough to write it down and document our intolerance. Everybody likes their history lesson? Here's where it gets really fun. America, from the 1900s until now, loved this holiday. Celebrated it like fiends, and that's not the wrong word. Okay? So you get to the 20s, roaring 20s, right? Just before the crash, everybody's having a great old time. That's when cities, Manhattan would be having a Halloween parade, and that's what it would be called. The Halloween Parade. And Junction City would have one, and Randolph would have one, and Russell would have one, and all these other towns would have one. And they would celebrate the change of harvest. Because we were very close to the ground, especially here. You don't get any closer to the ground than Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, farmland. Now, in the 50s, we start to do what you were talking about. We start figuring out how to monetize this thing. It's a good time to be alive in the 50s, right? You ever seen the pictures of kids on Halloween in grade school? They would have a Halloween day, and you would wear a costume. Now, there were all those toxic costumes that were incredibly flammable that we all just... We wore while teachers smoked, and so we you know... I mean, The fact that more of us just didn't go up in flames in those days is incredible. And we start making haunted houses just to bring people through. It's part of a community event, not part of a community scare-off. Okay? It's just a day in which we all get together to celebrate the harvest. But we call it Halloween. Somewhere around 1980, the rumors of razor blades and apples and drug dealers actually stuffing, their drugs in people's candy baskets come to life. I don't know why. I do know why. It's not the reason for the discussion here. But we became fearful as a people about this holiday. And that fear has stuck with us to today. And in order to jump onto that, people immediately start talking about how, once again, for the first time in almost 100 years, we focus on the paganism of the holiday. And we began to equate that with ritualistic satanic activity. And I ain't saying it didn't happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying that for the most part, it ain't that. Hans has something to say.
Having lived with pagans,
That's you guys, by the way. He lives with you.
so my point is, though, is that for those that find issues with Christianity, especially, they latch onto a timeline of something like this, so that they personally push back, be pagan, be witches, be shaman, and to live the way that they feel naturally they should. And I'm just saying that is a reality. I agree with your timeline, but they are also taking back over a holiday, if you will.
I don't disagree, but I'll say this. I've never met a single one. But I see them on the internet, so I believe they exist.
So, Halloween for me, all goes from when I was a kid. We'd walk around the whole town and get bags of candy.
Yeah.
And they have like a town Halloween party. So I don't know, obviously as a kid it was pure. Walking with my dad, my brother, and as you get adult, you're like, you guys start thinking, this may be bad. And but then only, to me it's now, only if we make it bad.
Only what?
Only if we make it bad.
All right, so now that was some tradition. You tacked on some preference at the end. Hold on to the preference. We're going to need it next week. Okay? Because that's what the way you perceive this holiday is very much preference. What's our tradition? We tend to ignore the holiday. Go ahead. Who else is our? It's me and you, bro.
There is the outside culture that literally creates cinematography and movies and things like that based on not necessarily the holidays that are utilized once again, taking the holiday to show what they wish to do.
So you knew that Halloween had become a purely commercial exercise when the Halloween movies came out. It's purely about churning out bad movies for money.
Speaking specifically about this congregation and during the time that I've been here, which is getting longer and longer.
all your, yeah.
We have had costume parties for Halloween. We have had trunk or treat, which is, that's basically a way of celebrating Halloween in a Christian way. Kind of reappropriating maybe a little bit of the holiday. So you asked what our tradition is. We don't have one, but we have done various things over the years or ignored it entirely.
I'll offer this. Our tradition is that we acknowledge something is going on out there, but we'd very much like to do our version of that within ourselves to keep ourselves all together. I would say to keep ourselves safe, but I don't think it's an unsafe holiday in Manhattan, Kansas. Does that make sense? That's how we do most of our things, right? We try to come together as a body of Christians and celebrate a thing. I think it's just one of our unwritten holidays. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, so, like she said, we remember trick-or-treating with our families. It's an innocent time. That's what we teach our children now. It's an innocent time. We have fun, we can run around in costumes, say trick-or-treat indoors. Then the problem is you have people who are making it into something pagan and evil. It's what you teach
I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure I can get 100% on the very last part of that statement. I think there's very clear definitions of what makes it pagan or not. I think what we're struggling with in regard to this holiday here in our conversation is there's a desire in us as Christians to label something and boot it out of us and walk away. But you can't boot something out of your society. You don't have that control. So hold on a second. I think Hans had his up, and then we'll go to you.
So, as to say, we are, even though we're talking about us, we are talking about speaking to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is just better to have an idea of what can or cannot happen, where the roots are absolutely important. But that is engaging in these conversations is what, you're right, we don't root them out. We literally engage and engage as Christians.
I like corn mazes. I only see them this time of year, though. Coincidence?
I think it's a word of caution, though. We are told to set ourselves apart from the world.
Right.
And there's a number of different ways of doing that, but we need to caution ourselves on how we're doing that relative to a lot of these holidays, ceremonies, and celebrations.
Mm-hmm.
We need to do it in such a fashion or manner that we are properly teaching our kids the correct path, and that we are properly cautioning ourselves of accepting the world into our doctrine.
Right. So there you go. There's one of your elders. I don't mean capital E elder running the church. I mean a member of our congregation who has been you born and raised Church of Christ, right? You became. I remember your story. All right.
I was born and raised as a Lutheran.
All right. I take it all back. I'm walking over to this side of the. All right. But it was good advice. There's a balance you have to strike within yourself spiritually, that you use Scripture to support, that you can defend when we talk about these things. Because we don't want to just adopt it haphazardly. We don't want to adopt it without any thought and forethought about how that's going to impact us. And that's why I think our terminologies are important. We rarely refer to it as Halloween. Inside here, we talk about harvest festivals, fall festivals, other things. And then we allow ourselves to support the fall aspects of season change. And then somehow we sneak in some candy. I sneak it in a little pumpkin-shaped basket.
Yeah, well, I hadn't really thought about this in a long time, but growing up in Pawhuska, we had, during the Halloween season, we had an event that was basically by the Founding Fathers, sponsored by the Founding Fathers of the city and the Christian community, and it was called Halloween Incorporated. And what they would do is they would take over the fairground, and the kids would meet there prior to the holiday, maybe a couple days, last Friday, and they would have things like that we got like Hero of more cakewalks and the jail.
Oh man, cakewalk.
Yeah, cakewalk. So they had a lot of activities that were oriented toward grade school, high school kids. That way they could kind of contain everybody.
Again, bringing everybody together to reinforce our values and traditions. That's why I prefer what was done in the 20s, 40s, and 50s. It was community-focused, and it was run by people who had two brain cells to rub together and had been around a while, and they were concerned about the culture of their community. And so we were seeking to raise that next generation of Manhattanite. And how do we do that? Because it is about passing on your traditions. If you think it's not, you're in the wrong life business, potentially. So just something to think about.
To piggyback on what I said a little bit ago, first
All right, more Lutheran talk. No, I'm kidding, brother. Go ahead.
Thessalonians 5:21-22 says, we are to abstain from all appearance of evil.
Yeah.
And if we really start celebrating and that type of thing, aren't we very close to becoming like the Catholicism that has been around throughout the ages? Because we're an example. Not
So,
only to ourselves, but to the outside world. So if they're looking at us and we're accepting
So I say no for one reason. I separate anything that you can think about that's pagan about this holiday, and I flush it. It is a change of season. We can always celebrate ourselves. We can always celebrate the world God created, and we can always come together to do that in a way that displays and showcases our values. That's the part that has to be agreed upon. I'm not interested in, black cats and bat Halloween figures. I'm not interested in all that, although I do love a haunted house. Please let me have haunted houses. I agree, but being separate and distinct doesn't mean that I do not allow myself to bring people to me with their own seasonal changes, potentially. I said that very poorly because I'm working on it as I stand here. But I don't think Halloween is a holiday you flush just because it was once pagan. I think you separate that stuff out, because before that, it was a season change. Go look at any cave wall with a 12,000-year-old human. And I think there's a way to separate that. But if I'm wrong, that's okay. We just won't. Yes, ma'am.
I think one thing that parents need to be careful of is what the kids are doing on that day, or the movies that they're watching. Because right now, every movie that's advertised that's in the theater is horror movies. And they're not just scary movies anymore. They are graphic and scary, and I don't think kids should be around that.
Yeah. I don't think you need to be desensitized to that level of violence. So I'm opposed to those just purely on that. All right, we got to move on. Closing comments on Halloween. I'm not asking you for a vote. I'm not asking you to do anything. But maybe if we want to reinforce some of our traditions and values on our children, and I hate to say take a holiday back, because it was never taken from us. But maybe we do something amongst ourselves. Okay, how about that? Everybody agree with that? It's in the name? Is that what we say? We're going to get to why there might be some friction in those statements. All right, so how's Christmas start? Don't say a baby in a manger. Because that's not how Christmas starts.
It starts out as a pagan midwinter holiday, and it's appropriated by the church to keep the pagans in.
Okay, you see the theme? There are ways to take over the world.
I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. I mean, there are a lot of... in doing some reading about this, I've seen a lot of different viewpoints, and I'm just going to try to raise another viewpoint without necessarily standing behind it. But it does seem that in the early church, along about 2nd or 3rd century, sometime in there was a desire to recognize the birth of Jesus, and there were some debates about, because nobody knows when he was born. Jewish people didn't celebrate birthdays, and so we just don't know. But there arose a belief that he would have been conceived at the vernal equinox, and then born 9 months later, based roughly at the winter solstice. And that seems to be, from what I can tell, an independent development within the church, apart from the appropriation of the pagan holiday.
So I'm gonna come down on the side of Rod and tell you what I think I know. So the earliest time we can actually date a Christ Mass, specifically for celebrating the birth of Christ, is in Africa. It's in 186 A.D. They have almost nothing to do with the Roman Empire at that time. There's a civil war going on. And they certainly have no pagan holidays to grab onto. There weren't very many holidays like that in Africa. I don't know why. Culturally, they just didn't have them. They celebrated other things. So most of us in the Western culture, we think Constantine created every and all Catholic holidays in 313 just by making the church the state religion. But it's not. These things have a history. Depending upon where you're born in the world, each culture tells its own history. And it does or does not have documents to back that up. So, in the West, when it makes its way to Rome, what is the closest holiday you can find? It's on the 26th. And when you get into the eastern part of the church in Russia, the holiday's on the 24th. Do you know we fought over the day of Christmas for almost 100 years? And we split the difference because that's how compromise is reached. And so you celebrate it on the 25th. It's a compromise holiday.
But then doesn't, you said 187?
186, yeah.
186? In Africa, I believe they worship the sun, moon, and stars, and if, going back to Rod's point, the Department equinox, isn't that relative to some of that worship?
Probably was, yes. They don't specifically mention it in the only documents they can find. Not a bad premise, because that's how cultures kind of do things, right?
In current beliefs, or,
Yeah.
that's the human element that we constantly battle
Yeah.
in Christian society, of trying to create a doctrine based upon human belief instead of a spiritual belief in Christ.
Yeah. We create our beliefs on what we know now, whenever our now was. So 200 years ago, you look back 200 years and you think all medicine was barbaric. Imagine what they're going to think about your medicine today 200 years from now. You were cutting into people? Oh, shame. Shame. Hans.
She definitely has a question. I'd like you to take hers, and then I would like to go after her.
Wow, the gentleman from the great state of New York yields his 3 minutes of time. Right. So, every culture incorporates and merges its things in different ways. The Christmas that the Christ Mass incorporates within Northern Europe, where you're talking about, already has a tree, already has a bucket of whatever late fall vegetables, fruits, candy-ish things are harvested to give to children. And when the Christ Mass comes, they immediately tack it onto that. That's why we have this date discrepancy that we fight over. Everybody wants to win this holiday, as they do each and every holiday. You are, sir. The man from the great state of New York.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick. Scripturally speaking, the reason we fight over this holiday, although it is something I guess we don't necessarily need to apply on the day, is that
Oh, we're gonna.
is that when the sheep were in the fields, and scripturally speaking, it would have been a different timeline in general. So that is, I'm just giving that as a background.
It would have been what? Say that last part again, sir.
It would have been a different time. It would have been more for firstborn being of spring. It would have been these timelines as opposed to a winter solstice.
Right. Rod.
I just wanted to mention that that's not really the only date controversy that there's been about Christmas. The Orthodox Church is celebrated on January 6th.
Yeah. Does everybody know that? If you grow up Greek Orthodox, you celebrate Christmas almost a week, 9 days later. It's at the end of that moon period, right? Yeah.
There's a difference between when we celebrate the birth of Christ as opposed to when Christ was born.
There we go. Now he's pulling out some Church of Christ business. He's getting to our business right now. So we're going to run through some history, and then we're going to talk about us, okay? So, early Protestants hated this holiday. First, foremost, because it was Catholic. And then, secondly, because they felt that the tree, the presents, all those other things took the focus off Christ. This is originally a mass where we all get together and it is only about Christ. And they take that away and they move part of the event into people's homes and into other community events. And it was one of the things that when you're splitting with someone, you get to decide what your new rules are. And so they weren't really fans of Christmas, believe it or not. Along with that war that goes on, once we start splitting, we never stop. Then we start to get all those other traditions from different parts of Europe coming together to try to make one event, the event we know now as Christmas. That whole 4 to 5 day holiday period where, peace on earth, goodwill towards men. Okay? It's a long process. How much of Christmas is secular? This was what I was talking about, that Rod and I were talking about. To you, how much of Christmas is secular? I'm sorry, everyone was just throwing it out. Hobbit? I didn't. All of it. I knew you didn't say Hobbit, so I just. Huh? The material things we put into it. So, ma'am. Now we'll go over here. We'll work our way. This will probably be where we stop. We're going to continue this discussion next week because I just opened up the exact can of worms I wanted. Because this is about us. It's about how we see things and why.
Well, there's not anywhere where it says in the Bible to celebrate the birth of Christ. Of course, it's an important thing. So for ourselves, we have tried not to bring the nativity and the birth of Christ and everything into our traditions as a family. It's a time for all of us to get together and get presents and everything. But the one thing with the world is that it is one of probably 2 times that Christians are all thinking alike or
What's the other one? Say Easter. What's the other one? Easter? You said there were... Sunday. He said every Sunday. Because he's born Church of Christ. So we do Easter every Sunday. However, yes, thank you for bringing up both those points. Because that's where we're gonna walk this conversation on to. Weird though, just to think about. I'm not asking you to derail your questions. Hold your questions. We're going to get to them. We give so much grace to Christmas for its secular activities that we don't give to Halloween for its. Then we're going to.
Say what I said last week in that I think to pull any of these holidays out and celebrate it specifically, like to honor God or do it as a religious thing would be unwarranted. But there's nothing wrong, and you can choose to celebrate each and every one of the holidays culturally as you see fit. That's kind of
That's what Paul says. He doesn't say it that eloquently either, so write that down. We'll put it in the first letter of Tracy to the Manhattan Church of Christ.
So what I was going to say is, I know as a kid growing up, yeah, it was about Christ, but really deep down as a kid, all I wanted was our family to come together and we eat and we just talk and spend time together on the table, on the big dining room table, and just have fun. Of course, watch football and just hang out together. We're all together.
That sounds like Thanksgiving.
It was about Christ, but it was all together, and that's what I like.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So as far as celebrating, the probably very large entourage of those that came from the East were looking for Christ. They were waiting for the prophecy. It was a celebration. They came with frankincense, myrrh, and gold, and it was a celebration. So having said that, though it's not stated, there were people looking for it, and they probably came from the dispersion, possibly because they used Scripture and they were coming. So that's
if God is the God of this world and the God of creation, he uses mistakes all the time. They're baked in. Your personal freedom allows you to make them. That doesn't mean he hasn't already accounted for them. Okay, we got about a minute or two left, and then we'll continue tradition next week. Did you have one?
I'm just listening. I was born and raised in the Church of Christ. And of course, as a child, I knew how the world viewed Christmas. I knew that it was considered Christ's birth. But that was not a part of my religious upbringing. We did not do the nativity. We did not even discuss Christ necessarily on Christmas, beyond the fact that, okay, this is the day the world has chosen to celebrate Christ's birth, but we don't know when that really was.
That's our standard line on Christmas.
I was just going to piggyback off of that with Carly as AG as she asks a lot of questions, and that's what we had said, is that this is when the world has chosen to celebrate.
Yeah.
But we don't really know when he was born, but really we need to be celebrating the fact that he was born every day, because that's pretty big.
Yeah. And that's laying some foundational work for when you tack scripture onto that about Christ's life later. Never saying anything creates confusion.
I think the bottom line is, in today's world, a lot of these holidays have nothing to do with Christ. From a worldly view.
No, that's why Rod broke his foot off in me. There's a line somewhere. I don't disagree. Do you? You hiring people yet?
So I've worked in retail 30 years, and I have seen a tremendous change in the holidays in the last 30 years. One, Thanksgiving is no longer Thanksgiving to the world. It is harvest. Christmas has been turned into an all-money-making machine. We get Christmas starting in July. It is all about the mighty dollar. Same thing with Halloween. We get Halloween starting in May. It's all about the mighty dollar. And when people ask me, don't you love Christmas? I'm like, I strongly dislike Christmas. I strongly dislike Halloween because, to me, I see the greedy people that other people do not see.
Yeah.
I see where they turn it into that almighty dollar. And there is a shift right now in Halloween where it's going right back to a very pagan holiday
Yeah.
for people. These younger generations are all consumed with the evil that Halloween used to represent.
So is it true paganism, or is it a caricature of what they think it was? Both are incorrect, but one is going to be much harder to root out. Maturity is going to take care of some of their misconceptions. Yeah. Okay, so we're on borrowed time, but I don't want to shut anybody down. So it's capitalism. I love it. Don't touch my capitalism. So there's a rule in America. Everybody thinks it's about freedom, but it's not. We'll argue about freedom all day long. You touch our capitalism, and we're coming for you. So be careful with that. There was a hand. Okay. You better say something profound, because that was the...
Is that that's true, but what people are always looking for is something to fill a hole with, and they will utilize something that's extravagant or crazy or now is a shocking thing.
Yeah, so that was the profound thing. So know why. Everyone has a hole in their life. And truly, the hole is supposed to be filled by Christ. You can fill it with anything. But when you fill it with anything other than Christ, it's a bad fit. And that's why people go sideways spiritually. And I can tell you that from truth, having to bore out my hole after I had filled it with something else. So that's probably the best way to look at it and understand people. Okay? So we'll finish talking about Christmas next week, and then we're going to talk about Easter. We'll see if we complete that conversation, and then we'll go on to our preferences the week following. So we're complete. Thank you for your time.